Good morning to you. Mark's out of HurricaneTrack.com here. Let's talk about Nicole here. It is now Tuesday, November 8th, and we've got a storm that is strengthening and becoming more tropical in its structure, and it is going to be heading for Florida in terms of the main area of energy, the center, if you will. But it is a very large storm. It's going to be impacting a lot of people from the Carolinas down to Florida. So let's take a look at the latest here and what to expect over the next couple of days. All right, by the way, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. If you're wondering what that background is, that would be my hotel room, and I'll explain what I'm doing down here in just a moment. So here's Nicole on satellite. Let's make that a little bit more thick there, folks. All right, there's Nicole on satellite, starting to look more tropical in its structure, developing somewhat of a central core, it does appear. Otherwise, it is just a very large wind machine sitting out here. Huge area of tropical storm force winds, and that is churning up the ocean, sending a lot of energy towards the coastline. So areas from the Outer Banks of North Carolina all the way down to a good deal of the east coast of Florida are going to see coastal flooding issues, wind, squally weather, power outages, occasionally some heavy rain, several inches of rain, and just a big mess overall as this system approaches Florida in the next day or so. Here is a close-up of that satellite. This is the visible satellite animation, and the center of circulation tucked in here somewhere. Yes, that looks a lot more tropical. There's your outflow developing in the upper levels of the atmosphere, well-defined circulation, and it's trying to develop deeper thunderstorms here near the center, so it's trying to pull everything in and become more concentrated. And if it does so early enough, this could be well on its way to becoming a hurricane, and we're starting to see some evidence of that right now. It is strengthening just a little bit faster pressure-wise than pretty much any of the guidance was showing us, and I can show you what I mean by that now, kind of back my words up with some evidence here. The 7 a.m. Eastern Time intermediate advisory, the pressure is down to 992 millibars, and as I'm going to show you on the modeling, nothing had it where the pressure was that low or intense. We measure tropical cyclones by wind and pressure is a measure of intensity, and none of them had it at that intensity this soon in the overall process. So a little bit concerning there, perhaps, and it is part of the headline, Nicole beginning to strengthen, so I figured we'd put that as our headline as well. So looking at the National Hurricane Center graphic, this really illustrates, hopefully, once and for all, that the cone is useless when it comes to impacts. This is the wind field, this very strange-looking orange area. That is the wind field of tropical storm force wind. This should start to contract more over the next day or so, not by a lot, but a little bit more as that central core area tries to get more defined. But all of this is headed towards the coast here. So from South Carolina all the way down into the peninsula area of Florida, including Lake Okeechobee, you're going to have a very windy, overall large storm system headed your way, pushing a lot of energy, a lot of water, rainfall. It's just a different type of system because it's not already a well-defined hurricane with a central core that we can see on radar and all that kind of stuff. Just think of it as this entire storm system here, that big mess. Well, that's headed for you, for a good chunk of Florida. And if we look at it that way in terms of impacts, I think that'll be very helpful. All right, speaking of impacts, rainfall, let's just look at some of the different graphics that the Hurricane Center has put out. Anywhere from 2 to 4 inches over a majority of the southeastern U.S., including the peninsula of Florida. The yellow area there, 4 to 6 inches, half a foot of rain. And this is problematic, especially right up here, because a lot of that is going to fall on the St. Johns River area, where flooding was absolutely substantial, historic in the wake of Ian, and any additional rain on that river basin is going to be problematic. So that's the rainfall forecast. The flash flooding potential is up to slight. That's the yellow area here, a slight risk of flash flooding. So the rain is not the biggest concern, but it is certainly a concern going forward here over the next few days. Now the storm surge, the onshore flow pushing the water towards the coast down here Expected 3 to 5 feet from roughly, let's just call it Cape Canaveral, north to the Altamaha Sound, including the mouth of the St. Johns River up here. The water very easily funneled into that area. The wind machine, and that's exactly what this is, this big old wind machine, just pushing that water constantly towards the coast, sending those waves in, and we have several high tide cycles. I think there's 4 to 5 more to go. So each high tide cycle gets progressively higher. So we're not talking about 10 to 15 feet of surge that's going to just wash everything away, you know, like we saw with very, very frightening video from people that were there, and some of the different cams that ourselves and other entities put out to capture Ian, a very well documented hurricane that was. This is not that same type of surge. This is a larger area that's going to be impacted and still problematic. Marinas, you know, if there's boats there that haven't been moved or properly secured, oceanfront property that is already vulnerable in the wake of Ian, maybe the bulkhead or any type of seawall action, whatever. Maybe that's been washed away, dunes washed away because of Ian. So you're going to have this chewing effect, this erosion effect from each of these high tide cycles, bringing in those big waves, bringing in the extra 3 to 5 feet of water rise, and that's just going to exacerbate the problem that Ian left behind. So this is the area that we're most concerned about that for. All right. Now, farther up the coast, pardon me, I always got to get those two right. Farther up the coast, let's just look at Charleston Harbor as an example here. Actually, I want to go over to the rivers, lakes, and rainfall. This gives you an idea of the nation's river gauges and flood gauges, ocean, inlets, bays, rivers, sounds, you name it. I'm just waiting for the hundreds of them to load before it lets me select a particular state. And in this situation, I want South Carolina, because this is important. While not in the storm surge warning or watch, I don't believe, Charleston Harbor right here, I'm just going to click on it because it'll help us to center it here. Look at where this is headed. The overall pattern from now going forward, these are your high and low tide cycles. Let's use orange to make it pop a little better. These are your high and low tide cycles, and the general trend is up through Thursday, where the guidance is suggesting major flooding of 8.4 feet. That's major, and that is more than a foot above flood stage at Charleston Harbor. And so that's part of what I'm doing in Charleston. I have set up a camera right down on the battery, and it'll be watching that over the next 3 days. And as we get towards Thursday, this is going to be the Thursday morning high tide, right about 8 a.m. it looks like. So well after the sun comes up, we'll be able to see that if this guidance holds. And the reason that we're seeing this is because the wind, and remember, Charleston is hundreds of miles away from where the center of Nicole is going to make landfall, and I can illustrate that point very nicely here on the, if it'll let me, on the track map. Let's go back to their track map here. So Charleston is right in here, okay, and the center of Nicole is supposed to make landfall way down there. As the crow flies, a straight line several hundred miles. So why is Charleston potentially going to have major flooding? Well, it's very simple. The wind is just going to constantly be shoved into the coastline from the east. So Charleston Harbor, that's a good example. Elsewhere along the low country, and even up in northeast South Carolina, where you have that concave shape, and then down along the concave shape of the Georgia coastline, where, yes, we do have storm surge warnings in effect. So a big, impactful system for sure, and a lot of people are going to be affected by this. And I know that there's a lot of concern for South Florida, down in the greater Miami area, Fort Lauderdale. Fortunately for you all, south of even West Palm Beach, it looks like, maybe even south of Vero Beach, not a lot of impacts overall. Your wind is going to be offshore down here, and the center, if it develops a more defined core, that'll be to the north of the greater Miami area by a pretty good distance. But the onshore flow, at least for a little while, could pile up the water down here and make things a little rough. But if you have interests in Southeast Florida proper, again, let's say West Palm Beach, Boca Raton down to Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and certainly the Keys, no problems there of any major significance. It's going to be the center and north especially in this situation, because it's not your typical symmetrical, well-defined core coming in. Yet, as I've explained here, there will be some impacts, and they could be pretty substantial overall, and it's all relative. Substantial as compared to Ian? No, but substantial enough. This is Nicole. Okay, we got to look at Nicole and not worry about comparing it to something else. This will have its own set of problems for sure for a big area of the Florida Peninsula down here on the East Coast, and even a little bit on the West Coast to some extent, as long as the center does not swing out over the Gulf, and it's looking less likely that it'll do that. Most of the effects on the west coast of Florida should generally be minimal. But even inland areas, you get that big orange wind field over inland areas of Florida, then all of your major, Ocala, Orlando, Jacksonville, all the way down to, I'm just trying to think of some of the other areas, even Arcadia, not a big city, but it was certainly impacted by Ian. Fort Myers, you could get some tropical storm force wind out of this, and that's not a good thing in the wake of Ian. A lot of people still have major recovery issues going on. So putting it into perspective, no, it's not one of your stronger events to ever impact Florida, but it certainly is one of the stronger winds to happen in November. 1985 is the last time, and that was Kate, and that was a Category 3 over on the Panhandle. A different setup overall. But yeah, Nicole is going to be problematic, and it needs to be taken seriously. It really does. So back to the Weather Service homepage, just to kind of illustrate here, very large area of coastline under some kind of watches and warnings. And if you want to know about your specific location, this is very helpful. I often reference this. Go to weather.gov, weather.gov, put in your zip code or the place name, Charleston, Fernandina Beach, whatever, and it'll pull up local information. And just to show you, you can also click Fernandina Beach up in the northeast part of Florida, and you can even zoom in more from there if you generally know where you live and you know your geography. And then you can zoom down. There's hurricane local statements, rip current statements, storm surge warning, anything in red, typically very important. And then your graphical forecast here. And then you can go down and read the forecast discussion. You can use the map over here and zoom in even more. There is Fernandina Beach right there. Click on that and you get more localized information as well. Just pointing this out to you. A lot of good, helpful, well thought out info here. The Hurricane Local Statement, one of the best, honestly, because it's written by the people in your area. This is not written from Denver or New York or Atlanta or whatever, some national desk, Washington, D.C. I'm just saying, this is local. This is your area. So a lot of good info there at the weather.gov homepage. Just type in the area that you're looking for up here in the search bar, or you can click on the map if you know your geography well enough, and you should. Come on. All right, listen, I mentioned that the pressure is a little bit ahead of where the modeling was suggesting. Even the 6Z version of the Euro, the GFS, and the HWRF, a hurricane-specific model, I'm going to show you here, we're off a little bit. Look at this, the 6 hours from 6Z, so that would be valid at just a little while ago. So 6Z, of course, is initialized at 1 a.m., so at about 7 a.m. Eastern Time, the GFS was thinking, so quote-unquote, forecasting, that's the right word, the pressure of 998. In reality, the recon data shows that the pressure is down to 992. That's important. That's a 6 millibar error that the model didn't know. It's already stronger by 6 millibars. So does that mean it's strengthening sooner? It very well could be. And as I showed you on satellite, it does appear to be getting better organized. Same thing on the Euro from the 6Z at 998, and the HWRF model a little closer at 996. Regardless, let's move this out and I'll show you what happens. as we get to this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow morning in the early morning hours, and then finally just after dawn on Wednesday. The pressure keeps dropping in the GFS pretty substantially there, getting it down to 980. That would be a solid hurricane in the pressure field. But look at this. This is so uber important, as the saying goes. 1032 millibar surface high. There's the outline of it right there. Huge area of high pressure, dense, cooler air, and then there's your tropical cyclone down there at 980. The difference in that pressure over distance, the difference over distance is your gradient, and that is that onshore flow absolutely piling the water against the coastline there, and that is why we're going to see such pronounced effects probably from Charleston, South Carolina south into a good deal of the east coast of Florida. This really explains it very, very well. And that's what you need to take very seriously. There's going to be a lot of impacts here from that coastal flooding and storm surge. And then the wind definitely is something to keep in mind. That moves inland over Florida and gets back almost into the Gulf a little bit there on the GFS anyway. I mean, heck, it goes all the way into the Gulf for what it's worth. And if it does exactly this, then yeah, the effects are going to be different for the Gulf Coast. We'll talk about that later. This is almost 3 days out. So let's see what shakes out. And then finally it starts to weaken substantially and gets caught in the westerlies, and out it goes. What about our friend and competitor, the Euro? All this stuff about the Euro and the GFS, whatever. So, it too, 998 valid basically right now. We know it's 992 in reality. What does the Euro do? It takes it a while. It doesn't get down to 992 until late tonight into early tomorrow. So it struggles with catching up to where we are even in reality. And then it doesn't strengthen it much at all until it gets closer to landfall there and maybe about 988. I find it hard to believe, seriously, and I'm not like, well, of course, Mark, you're into storms. Why, hear me out. I find it hard to believe that Nicole is only going to drop 4 more millibars between now and the time the Euro has this making landfall. Let's get rid of me so I can show you at hour number 51. So very late tomorrow night into early Thursday morning before the sun comes up. And then right there would just be a little bit after dawn, right? At 990. If it's 992 right now and the structure is improving, I just don't. I have a very hard time believing that it's only going to intensify pressure-wise a couple more millibars, maybe 4 more millibars of deepening, as we call it, before landfall. I don't believe that. The Gulf Stream is there, very warm water temperatures. The pattern is getting better. I find that hard to believe. We shall see. We shall see. Let's watch this evening and see what the pressure is, because even by this evening, let's just go back by tonight at around 10 p.m. or so, 10, 11 p.m., it still doesn't even have the correct pressure compared to where it is now. It's at 992, unless it's going to weaken tonight. So anyway, the HWRF model, the Hurricane Weather Research Forecast model, a tropical cyclone specific model, closer to reality because it's showing 996. And what does it show us over the next several days as we move this forward? The HWRF strengthens it and starts to develop a more defined core. You can see right here the inner core starts to develop a little bit better, and it moves towards the coast of Florida here. Now, the HWRF is probably overdoing it. Let's just be fair, hopefully. But hope is not a planning tool. You can't say, well, the HWRF is overdoing it, and I'm just going to ignore that. What if it's not? We just don't know. The models are good, but they don't know everything. They are one piece of guidance. We need to look at the structure of it. If the structure is improving faster and it looks like it's developing a more solid inner core, then the HWRF could be onto something here. It is a very good model, especially once we do have a developed system, and it is generally reliable. And the fact that it is showing 972, again, hopefully that's a bit overdone. It comes in there at 971. You can see that more concentrated inner core with a majority of the strongest winds on the north and east side, right into the Space Coast area, but strong onshore flow even up to the north of there. That's why you don't worry about just the center. Just the center. That's the heart of it. You got the rest of the system. You know, you really do. So please understand that when you look at these things. These wind field charts really help to explain that, I certainly hope. And look what happens. It crosses Florida, maybe gets over the Gulf a hair, maybe, and then kind of mills around until it finally dies away, eventually over the southeastern U.S. So that is what we're seeing here for Nicole at this fairly early morning hour of Tuesday, November the 8th. Again, I am in Charleston. I'm going to be leaving here in just a little bit. I have already put a camera up in Charleston. I will be heading down to Fernandina Beach next. That'll be several hours from now, obviously. And then I'm going to set my camera systems all along the east coast of Florida, working with different people that I know, mainly through social media and our Patreon, different supporters of ours that have offered up their property or they know people, etc. And I'm going to be setting up, I think, 8 more camera systems and then one of our weather stations as well, somewhere along the east coast of Florida between basically Fernandina and maybe as far south as Vero Beach. We'll have to wait and see. Also later this morning, we'll be streaming live probably around noon Eastern time, so we'll call it this afternoon early. So be sure to follow live on YouTube. And the best way to do that, this is a good segue, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my YouTube. It's easy. You just hit the button and hit the notification bell. That will notify you when we do anything, upload a video or go live. That's the best way to be up to date, all right? So I'll be keeping you posted here and on Twitter, also at HurricaneTrack. And again, I'll be live the rest of the day starting at about noon. And then when I get to the hotel, wherever that's going to be late tonight, I'll do another update. And let's see exactly where Nicole is and how the mighty Euro and the GFS are handling the apparent strengthening that we're seeing now, perhaps a little bit ahead of schedule, so to speak. All right, that is it for me. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. I am Mark Sudduth for Hurricane Track. I'll be back with you more live as we start our live coverage in just a few hours.